Yeah, those are estimates.
It started already? Okay, I'll put it on pause then. Okay, so according to my watch, at least it's 10:30, so we can start. And exactly, yeah. I was waiting for being, and it's nice to see everybody. Nice to know that people don't come for the coffee, and it's so okay, it's good. I wasn't sure, so now I have that. So I'm going to just start. It went as you may recall from last week. So I didn't quite cover everything that I had hoped to last week, which means that some of the things that I condensed what I had left over and also took out a section from this week as a result. But I wanted to focus on anomalies, if you will, of the 3 weeks. Some of the things that you don't necessarily expect. If you have so I'll use two examples, which are we know them, but when you think about them, you have to unpack them a little bit. The one was, and this is why I'd hoped to do it last week. Really, what was the status of last night? Was last night already Shavasar B'Tammuz? Was it the beginning of the 3 weeks, or did everything start this morning at Alot HaShachar, at dawn, when the fast officially went into effect? Is there any? Because normally speaking, if you think about the day, right? If you talk about, I don't know, Purim, so the Megillah reading at night is most likely a later something that was introduced at a later time. The Mishnayot only talks about reading the Megillah during the day, right? Not at night. And during the time of the Gemara, that's when the reading of the Megillah, the early generations of the Amoraim, but it was introduced there. Okay, but was it Purim, as it were, before? So presumably yes. I mean, you would say Al Hanisim already at Ma'ariv, and even though the mitzvah of the day is only starting in the morning, so is the same thing holding true when we talk about fast days, these minor fast days, so-called minor fast days, or that started last night, but the fasting, for whatever the reason, only starts during the daytime, or no, that the day is defined by the fast, and if you're not fasting yet, so then it's just not the day yet. So let's take a look at some of the halachot. So there's a Gemara in Taanit. I'm sorry.
Could you go to a concert last night?
That would be related. Yes, could we go to a concert? So let's take a look at the Gemara.
Ceremony for the Maccabees is scheduled.
Okay, could just go on and on. So Tanu Rabbanan. So the Mishnah, the Braita says the following: Amatai ochel v'shoteh ad sheya'aleh amud hashachar. From what point until when are you allowed to eat? This is with regard to both a taanit yachid. If I accept upon myself for whatever the reason, a taanit the day before, and I say, okay, tomorrow is going to be a fast day. So for me, at what point does the fast begin? So the Gemara says, or the Braita that's being quoted says that there's a little bit of a machloket. Namely, ad sheya'aleh amud hashachar, is it from the dawn? Divrei Rabbi, Rav Eliezer ben Shimon Omer, ad krot hagever, until the rooster crows. What do you do if you have a rooster? So you never have to fast. But the point though is that basically, right? There's a slight difference in terms of the time, right? And even today, in terms of determining when is Alot HaShachar, Neitz HaChama, sunrise, even there's a little bit of a machloket, but it's relatively straightforward, right? You see the disk of the sun at the horizon. So the machloket is whether you have to see the, even things that should be very simple or not simple, right? Is it the top of the disk breaking the horizon? Is it seeing the entire disk over? What happens if you are in a place, is it at sea level? Right, that's where it is. Or if so, for example, in the Yerushalayim, which the elevation roughly 750, 800 meters. So if you're looking to the east, looking down, so then you will see the sun, even if you were if you were totally at sea level. So then you would see the sun later than if you see it from above. Okay, so then but still. Sunrise is sunrise. What is dawn? Right? At what point is it darkest? And at what point is it the dawn? Right? So that's really the question. Okay, so they, how today it's calculated based on the number of degrees that the sun is beneath the horizon, etc. So some say, I think it's 16.1. Some say a little bit later, something like 12.7. So whatever it is, it's a question of how much brightness, and that's really what they're getting into here, right? It's just the glimmer of the sun, of the first light of dawn, or is it that it's a little bit later and that the barnyard animals are beginning to stir? Though I've been told by people who've raised chickens that their roosters did not wait till dawn at all. In any event, that is that machlok isn't so important to us. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela shelo gamar sudato. Aval gamar sudato eino ochel. So Abaye, that was the Breita. Now Abaye says that halacha is really dependent if you have not finished your nighttime meal. Or if it's the night, you finish your meal, at that point you can't eat anymore. Right? You finish dinner, so you can't eat, even though the fast is officially starting only in the morning. Eitvei, so Rava Gamar, Eitvei Rava, brings the following source to contradict Abaye. Gamar va'amad, harei ze ochel. So the Breita that says that if you finished eating, right, you're still allowed to, and you got up, you can eat some more. So the Gemara answers, Hatam kishalo silek. So the answer is whether did you clear the table or not? Has the meal really finished yet? If you haven't cleared the table, right? So so working with yeshiva guys, that means the meal is never over, right? So basically, if you haven't cleared the table, the meal isn't over. Fine. Ika de amre. So others say, Amarava lo shanu ela kishalo yashan. Aval yashan eino ochel. Right, so this other way of looking at it is not a question of whether you finished eating your nighttime meal, but rather if you've gone to sleep. If you haven't gone to sleep, so then you can continue eating. But if you went to bed and you wake up and it's 3 a.m, so then today, for example, Netzach Hamar was 4:11. So not Netz, excuse me, Alot HaShachar. So I didn't check as to when any roosters. But anyway, Aval Yashav, it was 4:10, roughly speaking. You wake up 3 a.m, so you can't eat because you went to sleep first. I ate Abaye. So here in this second version, it's Rava who makes this statement, and it's Abaye who asks the question, and he says Yashan va'amad hareza ochel. So first there's an answer. Hatam b'mitnamnem. There, it's the person is just dozing. He hasn't actually gone to sleep for the evening. Hechi dami mitnamnem. And if we're talking about mitnamnem, we have to define what's a doze and what is sleep. So Rav Ashi, nim velo nim, tir velo tir. It's you're not really asleep and you're not really awake. Dekarule va'ane, if someone calls you, you respond. Velo yada adure svara, but you can't really put a coherent thought together. V'chi mitkare, but if someone reminds you of what you were trying to say, then mitkar. That sort of, we all experience that some 24 hours a day. So that is Okay, so that's the Gemara. Okay, so basically so that's source number one. But there is a Yerushalmi which quotes that original Braita and gives a much more condensed version, but adds an important factor. Yashan ve'amad asur. So if you went to sleep and you woke up in the morning, so again, not quite the morning, it's asur to eat. Bishalo hitna. Right, this is an important addition, namely that only if you didn't make a condition, literally. But what that means is you didn't say, "Oh, you didn't set your alarm clock for 3:30 in the morning," right? Or you didn't say, "Oh, I know, sometimes I'll wake up. If I wake up, I'll eat, and if I don't wake up, then I'll sleep through the morning." So if you said that if you wake up, you'd like to have an early breakfast, so then you can eat. Aval im hitna, so if you made that condition, then it's mutar. But if you went to sleep, expected to sleep till the morning, and you woke up for whatever the reason in the middle of the night, so then you can't eat. The Rambam, when he quotes this halacha, number 3, the Rambam just mentions, first of all, he says it applies to all taaniyot, ben sibur, ben yachid, whether it's a taanit, a public fast like what we are having today, or an individual fast that a person takes upon himself. So you can eat and drink until dawn. V'hu shelo yashan. Aval im yashan enu chozer v'ochel. Rambam ignores the Yerushalmi. He doesn't mention that at all, and the Rambam was aware of the Yerushalmi. Rambam quotes the Yerushalmi not infrequently, so presumably he says he's looking at this as a machlok between the Gemara, our Gemara, and the Yerushalmi. Our Gemara doesn't make any distinction, and he's following our Gemara. So basically, once you go to sleep, so then that's it. However, the Shulchan Aruch, based on other Rishonim, disagrees and goes lakula. Kol taanit she'ochlin bo balayla. Number 4, ben betzibur ben yachid hareza ochev v'shoteh ad she'ela al amud hashachar v'hu shelo yashen aval im yashan eno chozer v'ochev v'lo shoteh. In other words, he quotes almost verbatim the Rambam, and then he adds ela im ken hitner le'echol al ishtot, unless that person made it clear in his own mind. It doesn't have to be that he or she verbalizes it, but it makes it clear that they know that this is what's going to happen. And now the Ramah quotes an Ashkenazic source, which comes up. There are those who say that when it comes to drinking, and then there's a machloket whether this is only water, the consensus that it's only water, you don't require a particular condition. Because people, normally speaking, if you wake up in the middle of the night, right, you'll take a drink of water. You won't go and have a meal, you won't have breakfast, but having a drink of water, right, getting up in the middle of the night is not an uncommon thing, and you have a quick, a drink of water, you're a little thirsty, and then you'll go back to sleep. So that isn't considered to be a problem, according to that opinion, even without the Tanai, and he says it's as though you made a condition. Now, the lahalacha, right, not that anything that we've said until now hasn't been lahalacha, but the consensus amongst the Ashkenazic poskim is to follow that Ramah. Having said so, that you should try to have have the Tanai that the Shulchan Aruch speaks about. But if you have if you generally if you're, this is something which is very subjective, very personal, is are you an early riser? Do you get up in the middle of the night? If you do, and you normally drink, so then that is something, then you certainly can follow the Ramah. If, on the other hand, you know that there are people like that, but you're not one of them. So then you should, and you want to eat or drink before the fast. So then you should make the t'nai. From what I understood from the Sephardic poskim, is that they more or less accept this, even though they, when it comes to drinking without the t'nai, they generally don't accept the Ramah. But if a person is if he or she is somebody who normally would wake up and would drink, so then the Sephardic poskim that I saw also seemed to agree with that basic psak. Okay. What do I see from this? So it would seem, right, all of this, so the nitty-gritty is, I guess, important in terms of the halakha itself, but it seems as though that basically the fast has started already from the time that you finished your meal, from the time that you went to bed, meaning it started at the beginning of the day. And that there has been a concession, which we spoke about last week, as part of that strange halakha. It's an anomaly in itself, that you can talk about a day with a sliding scale as to how severe the restrictions are going to be, depending on the socio and political conditions that you find yourself living in. Right? The very fact that you say, well, if things are good for the Jews, again, I'm generalizing, I'm not going to go back into everything we spoke about last week, but so then the fast might not apply at all. And if things are terrible, then the fast is as bad as Tisha B'Av. And if it's, kacha, so then we do what we do, right? So that is implying that this is a 24-hour event. And a concession is made because we live in the kacha times, right? Lo shalom, below shmad, etc. To use the lashon gemara. However, there's another halacha, and this might reflect on this as well. And this is with regard to the question of saying anenu as part of the tefillot. Right? As we all know, we add a special bracha to the Shmona Esrei. Ashkenazim add it only, and we'll see why, only in mincha for the individual, but the Chazan already adds the extra bracha at Shacharit. But let's take a look at this very quickly. So here, the Shulchan Aruch says the following. I cut out a lot of the some of the sources here just to streamline a little bit. So the Shulchan Aruch says the following: Yesh omrim she'ena yachid omer anenu ki im b'mincha shema yochzenu b'humus v'nimsa shakran b'tfilata. Aval shliach tzibur omro gam b'tfilat shacharit kshu mitpalel b'kol ram she'yafshar shlo yitanu k'tzat mehakahal. Right. So there are those who say that an individual, and this is really the Ashkenazic practice, will not say anenu until mincha. Why? Because maybe he will have some kind of bulmus, I guess would be some kind of. Well, I'm sorry.
Falling out.
Falling out. It could be an epileptic incident, but basically it means that he will fall ill during the course of the fast and be forced to eat. Because be allowed to eat, not forced to eat. Is allowed to eat. You start fasting and you think that you're going to have an okay fast, and then for whatever the reason you come down with a terrible migraine, right? And you just have to have something to. Again, you can go through whatever ailment that people have, and so because that's there, so you shouldn't do it until mincha time. When by that point, even if you're davening mincha relatively early in the afternoon, still the odds are that you'll finish your fast. However, shliach tzibur, so representing the entire kahal, so there are going to be people who are going to fast, and therefore you can say anenu. However, so that's with regard to other fasts. However, uvarbat samot, but in the 4 fasts that we're talking about, which Shabbat Sabbath Tammuz is one, Gama Yachid Omrim Bechol Tfilotam. According to the Shulchan Aruch, you say Anenu last night, right? The Yachid. says it. No, you go to Ma'ariv, and it's the early Ma'ariv last night was about 8:10 or so. You daven Ma'ariv, and then you're going to have dinner afterwards. You know it. Right? That's the plan. Right? So you nevertheless say Anenu in Ma'ariv. To this day, Sfardim don't hold this way. Sfardim do not accept the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. The one community that does, not because it's necessarily accepting the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, but is following this idea, is the idea that is Teimanim. Teimanim have, if you take a look at the Teimani Siddur, you'll see that they say Anenu in all of the tefillot. And that clearly is going back to what we were saying before. In other words, basically what it's saying is that you're saying Anenu because it's true. It seems very odd, right? I say Anenu biyom tzom taanitenu, right? Pass the brownies, right? But having said that, while it's weird, but it makes sense because last night was already tzom taanitenu. The fact that I'm not eating. That I am eating, is not the point, because the day has begun. It is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. The fasting part of it will only begin tomorrow or in the morning. So that weirdness factor is enough that for the Sfardim, they say, okay, enough. We can't accept this idea. It's a little bit too, we'll say, analytically correct, right? Emotionally off, right? So we're not going to go with that. So we're going to start in the morning. But if you're looking at it from a purely legal perspective, it is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and of course you should be saying Anenu, etc. Now however, here, and this is important, I didn't bring the source directly. You'll see the reference in a moment. We'll just flip the page to a tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein in this regard. There is an opinion that argues in principle. The Bala Ma'or, the Zachi Alevi, one of the great provincial sources of the 12th century. So he is of the opinion that no, the fast only begins in the morning. So you can only say Anenu. It's not because there's this disconnect, right? That we have this idea that you're saying Tzom Tanitenu and you're eating. The fact that you're eating means that it's not the fast yet. So if you accept his position, so then basically you have to reread the previous Gemara as well. The previous Gemara is not saying then, according to that way of thinking, it's not saying that the day began last night and there's a concession that's been made that the fasting will only begin at dawn. Rather, it's looking at the other way. The fast day begins when your day begins. How do I define when your day begins? So generally speaking, if you have to take an objective criterion, that objective criterion is light and dark, night and day. But subjectively, your day begins when you wake up. That's how he would view it. So basically, it's not that the fast really begins at dawn. The fast begins when you wake up.
Or if you do shift work.
Right? Sorry? Okay, so if you do shift work. So that's why, if you are starting, if you will, from now you can understand the machloka between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi in a different way as well. The Bavli says, I don't care what you make your t'nai about. I'm going to wake up early, and I'm going to have and this is what I did, by the way. Being true confessions, right? So this morning, right, I set the alarm. I didn't need it. I woke up a few minutes before 3:30 in the morning. Made myself a cup of coffee, so I won't have caffeine withdrawal too much during the day. Had a light breakfast, went back to sleep. Okay, fine, okay. So but the Bavli says, no, you can't do that. right? Because if you do that, the fast begins when you wake up. You went to sleep. Now you're getting up, so you got up at 3:30 in the morning. I'm sorry for you. Right? But your fast started then. It doesn't change. Whereas the Yerushalmi, and this is the way we're passing, the Yerushalmi is saying that it's based on the condition. Now the condition very well might be, and you can make this, perhaps this is the argument, is that the condition now is viewing it from the other perspective, that the fast really, that the fast, the day itself started last night. And now, when does the fasting begin? So that's up to me. It's going to have to begin in the morning, but if not, so then it's a question of when I wake up. Based on this machloket, so here's the following question, which was asked to Rav Moshe back in 1950. So Nishalti, source number 8. V'yedidi Gaon Rav Menachem Falak Bishna Tafshin Yud Shechal Shivasar B'Tammuz Biyom Rishon. Okay, so it happened to be that it was a Sunday that year. Im yesh la'asot nisuim b'leil motzei Shabbat Kodesh or Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. So for whatever the reason, they wanted to make the wedding on Saturday night. What? It was back in 1950, right? Yeah, so there's a question. You're right. I would be very interested to hear the backstory. Okay, I would be interested. There has to be a backstory, but we don't get it. V'heshafti shelitzorech yesh lahatir. That if there is a real need, you can be making and actually make a wedding at night. The lechora, and he explains, talui ze b'machlokot harishonim im taanit matchil b'layla v'omrim anenu b'or taanit. So does the fast begin at night? And you say anenu already the night. Or taanit is the euphemism for night, for the day, the light of the fast. The Balamor she'ein omrim mishum sha'tanit matchil miboker. So then, gam dinei ben hamitzarim ein matchilin ela me'aboker. So based on this, so he says, if you hold like the Balamor, you can do that. Then he continues, deleted a few lines here. Mikom makom le'inyan zeh shemidina lo hayalon le'asor klal. So now he adds another factor. The other factor is that the minhagim of Shivasar B'Tammuz, he's not talking about the fasting. Fasting, not fasting, that's halacha. Right, today, right, so you could say the Balamor is a very interesting shita, but everybody else goes the other way. So it is Shivasar B'Tammuz, but he says that since the customs of the 3 weeks are just that, they're customs, and they are later. Now is not the time to get into it. When you take a look at the Gemara, we'll see a little bit in the second section, which I'll start in 1 minute, but that you'll see a little bit of a taste of the Dinah Gemara. But the minhagim of that we are, whether you're Ashkenazic or you're Sephardi, we're much more machmir than what the Gemara demands in terms of this period of time. So the minhagim of not having a wedding during the full 3 weeks. So that is just a minhag ba'alma, mishum avelu birabim, efsher, so it's possible, Gamarir, Firashi, Ramban, Asorim, de Taanit, Matchil be'erev, yodu sheli'inyan zeh, rak mizman shenikar shemit ablin. It's only going to start from the point where it's clear that everyone has begun their avelut period, right? If you think about it, last night, if you're you could have had a very a large meal. There's no indication that Shivasar B'Tammuz practically has begun. Even if legally it has started, practically it hasn't begun. So therefore, with regard to the minhagim, you can be makel. So this is an important tshuva of Rav Moshe. Many people quote it, even those who are machmir. He continues and he says that he's talking about specifically when it happened on a Sunday. But if Shivasa B'Tammuz had fallen out on Shabbat, but was only being practiced as a result on Sunday, so then you couldn't have the wedding. Then it was already Yud Chet, so then you couldn't have the wedding. But basically, according to this, so there's a question that comes up in terms of Sheva Brachot last night. I know at least people may have got married this past week. Could you have Sheva Brachot? So there's some poskim who say, no, you can't have Sheva Brachot already. But even though it's a little bit of a weird thing, they say you shouldn't have Sheva Brachot the night of Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, but you can have Sheva Brachot on Yud Chet. In other words, the customs of it's because it's Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. It's not because it's the 3 weeks. Sheva Brachot trumps the 3 weeks, but it doesn't trump Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, according to that opinion. Another poskim say, which I think is the accepted minhag, is that you can have Sheva Brachot, but you shouldn't have live music or something along those lines. You can have the meal and you can say the brachot, etc. The general consensus is that last night already, for those people who have meaning Ashkenazim, who have the minhag not to shave and not to take haircuts, so you shouldn't have a haircut last night. And it was because, again, it's already Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, it's already the 3 weeks, and so those minhagim have begun. Okay, so this is just an anomaly which people should be aware of, and is no longer relevant for this year, and hopefully will not need to be relevant for the future. We should all be zocha. Okay. Now, with regard to what may become relevant in a few weeks, when it's a week and a half, when we start the 9 days, and the question of not eating meat or drinking wine during the 9 days. So this is also what I viewed as somewhat anomalous, as opposed to the other customs. The other customs, and was made famous by Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal. So famous that I haven't seen necessarily in print in terms of him actually writing it, but everyone quotes Rav Soloveitchik in this regard, and that that basically the customs of of this period of time is the inverse of the customs of Avelut that we have, God forbid, when a person is sitting Shiva. For a loved one, meaning that if you think about it, you start Avelut with the period of Aninut. Right? You start before the person has even been buried, and at that point, so a person isn't allowed to eat meat, not allowed to drink wine, doesn't engage in various mitzvot, etc. Then you go into the next stage of the burial, and then the first part of Shiva, this is less well known, but the first day and the first 3 days they have specific halachot that apply to them, and then the full Shiva, then Shloshim. So there is a general easing of the minhagim of Avelut as you go along. And when it comes to the practices leading up to Tisha B'Av, it's just the opposite. We start with the practices of the 3 weeks, and then they become more severe during the 9 days, become more severe during the period of the Shavua Shechalbo, the week that Tisha B'Av falls out. Then there are special halachot immediately before Tisha B'Av, and then of course Tisha B'Av itself is the most severe of those customs. And so Rav Soloveitchik explained that the halacha is concerned with the psychology of the individual. Whereas when it comes to a personal loss, so the halacha doesn't have to tell us to mourn. We're broken. And the role of the halacha is how to ease us out of that and get us back into us to appropriately mourn during that time of mourning, and then to ease us back into the world around us. That is what the halakha is trying to do. And so we start with that tremendously restrictive feeling at that time. You can't do mitzvot, right? You haven't even had a chance to bury your dead. You can't. How can you be thinking about putting on tefillin, saying a bracha? How can you do that? But slowly you are said, no, you have to do that. And during the time of the Shiva, you're allowed to eat meat, and you're allowed to drink wine, and you have to engage in all of the mitzvot, etc. But you're still sitting on the floor, and you slowly get back into we'll call it the new normal. Okay, that is the goal of the halakha. When it comes to dealing with events that occurred thousands of years ago and don't impact us in any way, so the halakha is doing it just the opposite way. In other words, basically saying, in other words, you don't just start with Tisha B'Av. You start with Tisha B'Av, so there's a disconnect. So you ease into the Avelut, so that you can appreciate Tisha B'Av when Tisha B'Av when Tisha B'Av happens 3 weeks later. So if you take a look at all of the minhagim, they more or less fit into that model. Right? The customs of the 3 weeks are more or less along the lines of the customs of the person in Avelut of the year of Avelut for a parent. The customs of the 9 days, Shavua Shechalbo, are basically the halachot of Shloshim, and the halachot of Tisha B'Av is the halacha of Shiva. Already in the Gemara, there's a little bit of a anomaly. What's the anomaly? This practice of not eating meat and drinking wine. Mishenichnas av mima'atin b'simcha. Shabbat shechal tisha b'av liyot b'tocho. This is source number 9. Asur l'saperim l'chabes u'chamishi mutarin mipnei kvod Shabbat. So when Av begins, no mention of the 3 weeks at all in the Gemara. So, but when Av begins, Rosh Chodesh Av, so then without explaining, the Gemara will explain certain practices that you shouldn't do. You lessen your joy. However, only the week of Tisha B'Av, Shavua Shechalbo, do you have actual practices that are practices of Avelut. What are they? You can't get haircuts, you can't launder, and the B'chamishi, however, if it's on Thursday, and it sounds as though it's Tisha B'Av this Thursday, like this year, mutarin mipnei kvod Shabbat. So then you can do your laundry earlier in order for Shabbat. It's the etc. Erev Tisha B'Av. Now this is the anomaly. Erev Tisha B'Av lo yochal adam shnei tavshilin, v'lo yochal basar v'lo yishteh yain. So on Erev Tisha B'Av, you should not eat 2 foods together, and as part of that, 2 cooked foods, and you should not have meat, and you should not drink wine. The Gemara explains, number 10, Amar Rav Yehuda lo shanu ela mishesh sha'ot ulamala, mishesh sha'ot ulamata mutar. So what we're only referring to Tisha B'Av in the afternoon, Erev Tisha B'Av in the afternoon, that you're restricted in terms of what you can eat, but you can eat whatever you want before noon, until the 6th hour. But Amar Rav Yehuda lo shanu ela besuda mafsik ba, and Rav Yehuda said no, not only the 6th hour, but rather it's only in the last meal that you're about to eat. Aval besuda she'eino mafsik ba mutar. But it sounds as though even if it's not your last meal of before the fast, even if it's afternoon, you can eat meat, you can drink wine, you can have this is of course the source for our Suda Mafseket, right? The idea of sitting down and on the ground, and having a piece of bread, and some people have an egg, etc. All of that dipped in ashes, different minhagim that have developed over time. That is, its source is over here. But as you can see, that the whole idea of not eating meat is restricted to only to this period of time. This is the way that the Rambam brings the halacha, by the way, number 12. Right? He talks about the various minhagim in 11. Mishi Kanes we'll start at 11. Tisha B'Av Leilo Kiyomo L'Chol Davar. Tisha B'Av, the halachot of the night of Tisha B'Av are the same as the day. Ein ochlin el mibod yom. You have to finish your eating while it's still daylight of Erev Tisha B'Av. Of Ben Hashmashot Shelo Asur Kiyom HaKippurim. The period between sunset and the stars coming out is the dusk is asur as though it's Yom Kippur. V'lo yochol basar v'lo yishteh yayin b'suda mafsik ba. Shouldn't have meat or wine in the suda mafseket. Aval shotehu yayin migito sheyesh lo shlosha yamim o pachot. But you can have grape juice if you want, if it hasn't been in the fermenting for 3 days. V'ochel basar maliach sheyesh lo shlosha yamim o yoter. If you have salt beef, so then remember, no refrigeration. So if you have something biltong, so then you can eat that. V'lo yochal shnei tavshilin, and you shouldn't have two cooked foods together at this meal. And then he quotes V'shekanes ab mematin b'simcha. This was actually the halacha before. In other words, you can see I put the halacha zayin, the Rambam paskins the exactly what the din of the Gemara is. But then he adds, after he brings the other halachot of the following, he says it before he says the halacha. That's the interesting part. Uchvar nahagu Yisrael shelo le'echol basar b'shabbat zo v'lo yikansu lemerchatz ad sheyavor hataanit. So he said, the Rambam says, even though that's the halacha is you can only have no meat, no wine, the suda mafseket. But the minhag of Yisrael is not to do it the entire week of Shavua Shechalva. Right? That's the minhag according to the Rambam. We'll see that even the time of the Rambam, it's not so clear that was the minhag, but at least the Rambam claims that that's the minhag. Why do I say this is an anomaly, by the way, in terms of everything that's going on? Because, as I mentioned before, during Shiva you're allowed to eat meat and drink wine. Right, so what's the question of drinking meat? What is the only time that a person who is experiencing avelut is not allowed to have meat or wine? Is not during avelut, but during aninut, right? During the period of time before the burial. So shemeito mutal b'fanav. So I can understand now why the Gemara says that this is the halacha for Erev Tisha B'Av. In other words, this is in effect as though the mikdash is burning in front of my eyes. Now on Tisha B'Av itself, I should say, so therefore on Tisha B'Av, you don't eat meat and you don't drink wine. But we don't eat anything. So we push that off to our Suda Mafseket. Right? We push that off. And so basically it's expressing the fact that given given this technicality that it's a fast day, this is the aninut moment when on Erev Tisha B'Av. In theory, it could have been on Tisha B'Av itself, but if it's and so min hadin, I would say, then if a person is allowed to eat on Tisha B'Av, that person shouldn't have meat or drink wine. Because again, that's the impact. But stretching it backwards, back to the beginning of the 9 days, or the way the Rambam says to Shavua Shechalbo, that is already what's that? Well, that's the 30-day, right? That's the Shloshim parallel. Where does that come from? So apparently it comes from a tshuva of the Gaonim. We don't have the original tshuva, we have it quoted in a source which is a little bit after the Rambam. In the Sefer HaManhig, it's a source from Lunel in France, in southern France, in Provence. So, but it's quoting Rav Hai, so presumably it is the Sefer HaManhig is considered to be a reliable source of Gaonic material. So the Katav Rav Hai, Avagav de Amr B'Yushalmi de Taanit Psachim b'Makom Shenahagu Amr Rav Ze'ira Nishaya de Nahagin de Lo Lemishtei Chamra. So the women in the community have this minhag not to drink wine. Lo michal bisra min de'av alil ad afukei ta'anita. From the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Av until after the fast. Why? Minhaga shebo paska even hashtiya. Matam ki hashtut yehersun. And it's coming from it's a play on the words of the even hashtiya, the foundation stone of upon which the Aron was there, which according to the midrashic the tradition is that is the place where the world was created from, and so that has been destroyed with the destruction of the Mikdash, and so there's a play on the word ashtut yeharsun, right, from shtiya, from drinking. Right, so we don't drink wine because of that. So and as a result, the minhag kol Yisrael delo limishchat meireish yarcha da'av ki im b'tisha b'av mishesh sha'ot ulamala lefi sha'ad hayom nimneu milishchot shelo yavo la'achol behem. So there's a chumrah on the chumrah that you not only shouldn't have meat, but you shouldn't shecht either. Right, this is going on. You shouldn't prepare any meat, but perhaps ironically, you're allowed to shecht on Tisha B'Av itself in the afternoon, because now you have to start getting ready for post Tisha B'Av. Uviyom taanit she'en adam mocher en ligzor v'lachush. In other words, you don't have to worry about people eating the meat. If you again in the age pre-refrigeration, so you're going to if you shecht the animal, you're going to want to eat it. Otherwise, it's going to go to waste. So even if you're able to some way preserve that meat, you shouldn't have shchita. That remains the minhag in many places that the shlacht houses close down during the 9 days. And so that is the where you get it from. But so you have here the Rambam, presumably when he says Kfar Nahagu Yisrael, so is working off of that Gaonic minhag, but at least the way it was practiced, where the Rambam was more makel than the Gaonim. The Gaonim said that you should be starting this already from the beginning of the 9 days. Mida alil av. When the 9 days begin, whereas the Rambam is restricting it to only during Shavua Shechalbo. The
from the Rambam.
What?
He just says b'Shabbat though.
B'Shabbat zo, in this week.
Oh.
When he says b'Shabbat zo, it means that week. Right.
Oh.
The Rashba, right? So who's a little bit later. That's why I put the dates here, so that you can see sort of how things are developing. But they're all in that same relatively close area of southern. The Manhig himself makes it he was born in Lunel, but much of his career was in Spain, in Aragon, and in Toledo. So he seems to be saying that this is the minhag, but a couple of generations later, the Rashba, who's in Barcelona, so he says, someone asked him the following question, whether they themselves, their established minhag was not to eat meat, right? From Mishenichnas Av, so can they be lenient with this? So he said the following: your fathers have had this minhag, shelo le'achol basar mishenichnas av, from the time of Av, again, not like what the Rambam said. V'av al pi she'ein kan isur klal midina Talmud, she'afilu be'erev hatzom b'suda she'ein mafsik bo mutar le'achol basar v'lishtot yain. So he says, even though it's a minhag, and there's no source in the Gemara that points to this minhag, afilu kein, nevertheless, bisha ochel basar b'chol ha'mekamot she'nagu bo isur poretz geder shel rishonim. Right, so that poretz geder shel rishonim is very strong language. What it means is you are breaking the fence, you're breaching the walls of what the rishonim did. In other words, we take minhagim very seriously, and if you're coming from that area, so then you should take your minhag very seriously, and you have no leeway whatsoever to be makil here. All right, that's what he's saying. But what you're reading between the lines is that there are plenty of places, and maybe the Rashba himself doesn't have that minhag. Right? It's minhag avotechem. He doesn't say minhag avotenu or minhag mikomenu or anything along those lines. He's saying from where you are, so then you have to be very careful. Right? Right, along with the rice that we eat on Pesach, so we eat the meat during the 9 days. It's not a problem. But if you're being machmir about this, then you have to be machmir to the very end. Someone who is a couple of generations after the Rashba, one of the commentaries on perhaps the primary commentary on the Rambam, the Magid Mishnah. So he is. It's also the Toulouse. It's not clear whether it's Toulouse in France or there's a town Tolosa in Spain where nobody knows where he was born. But the point is that he is primarily in Spain. Number 15 here. Haminag hazeh lo pashot ba'artzot elu. Li'inyan achilat basar she'ein nimna'in ela erev taanit. So he's reporting that in the 14th century in Spain, people ate meat throughout the 9 days. Shvua shechal bo, not an issue. What about Ashkenazim? What? Correct. Right. I'm not 100% sure. I want to double check that, but because of what the Rambam says, that nahagu. So I'm not sure if they follow that, but it's quite possible that they don't. Right? So this is the idea. What about Ashkenazim? So Yesh Anshe Ma'aseh, the Maharil is in the 15th century. So he says that the Yesh Anshe Ma'aseh shemonin milachol basar milishtot yain mishiv'aser b'tamuz Tisha B'av. Right. So there are those who already today, tonight, maybe last night also, right? First part of this year. So will not eat meat or drink wine from Shiv'aser b'tamuz. V'chein b'leilei motzei Tisha B'av. This is the first source that I'm familiar with that talks about not eating meat after the fast as well. Lefi she'az haya ikor korban. Why? Because the Mesorah is that the Beit HaMikdash was set afire in the afternoon of the 9th, but most of the burning of the building actually took place on the 10th. And all three minhagim, by the way, are brought by the Shulchan Aruch. Number 7, Yesh noagim shelo le'achol basar v'lo l'shtot b'Shabbat zeh. There are those who don't do it on the week of Tisha B'av. Yesh mosifim mirosh chodesh ala taanit. There are those who add and will not eat meat during the entire 9 days. V'yesh mosifim zayin b'tamuz. And there are those who do not. The prevalent Sephardic practice is to follow the Ashkenazic practice here of the 9 days. I mean, not that following the Ashkenazic practice because it's the Gaonim. Whereas the prevalent one is there are those Sephardim who will not eat meat only during Shavuot Shechal Bo. There are those. But the prevalent practice is for Sephardim as well, is not to eat during the course of the entire 9 days, which makes it anomalous for them because all of the other minhagim, right? There are very few minhagim. I'm Sephardim here. I apologize for saying we, but most of the people in this room are Ashkenazim, right? Myself included. So took the minhagim, which the Gemara talks about only on the week of Tisha B'av, and expanded backwards to the Rosh Chodesh, right? In terms of laundry, in terms of bathing in hot water, etc. All these things that happen. That is during the so-called 9 days. But Sfardim, as is well known, do not do that. They retain Shavua Shechalbo. The exception being, except for most Sfardim, not all Sfardim, is the with regard to eating meat, but the Mechaber brings all three of Minhagim. You see already in the Minhagim, and I do, you know what? I don't have time to get into it. I'll just point out there's a very interesting tshuva number 19 that the question arises: can I have a restaurant? Can I serve meat in my restaurant and have a kosher restaurant on Besiva Hashkacha? Because I know not everybody is going to be. There are people who are allowed to eat meat for health reasons. Number one, and number two, not everyone is machmir on this, and they can go to other restaurants, and I can lose business if I close my restaurant during the course. So Ravadi is makil to keep the restaurant open. He mentions the practice, and I don't know if this is still the position of the Rabbanut Rashit, but that which he raises an eyebrow about the basic practice, but he says, but since it's the practice, we'll accept it. That basically the Rabbanut Rashid's position back in the day was that to give hashgachot and allow restaurants to remain open, because the concern was that people who will go to a kosher restaurant when it's available, but if it's not available, will not necessarily eat kosher. So you are causing them, right? They don't care about eating meat or not eating meat during the 9 days, but they want more or less to keep kosher. So if you close the restaurants down, so then you're limiting their options, and then they might eat non-kosher food. So for that concern, it's better to have the restaurant open. Okay. Now, that is the background for the last 4 minutes of the shir. Namely, the real anomaly of this is, of course, the siyum, right? That people make siyumim. There's a parallel to this with on Erev Pesach, but it's not identical, right? Because there you make the siyum, and then you can eat all day. Now you make the siyum so you can eat meat, but only in the place where they made the siyum, right? So here you have, where does this come from? Where does this whole idea? So it starts in that same Maharil, where it's brought, and he says not mentioned in any of the Sephardic sources, but he says Lefi zeh she'ein chova im ira milah pidyon ben. It was basically saying, since we have established that there isn't any real din in terms of any real isser of eating meat or drinking wine, so if you have a good reason to eat meat, if there's a brit milah, if there is a pidyon, if o siyum mesechta Dehein sudat mitzvah mishinichnas av, az mutar lekruin sham le'achol basar v'gam l'shtot yayin. So then the invited guests can eat the meat and drink the wine. V'davka krovim, but he already knows that, you open it a little bit, it's over. So he says specifically, davka krovim mishum kurva inami reyut, only relatives, only good friends, aval ha'olchim sham rak lishtot, right? But people who are attending because this is their opportunity. Right? So it's a mitzvah because you're going to a sudat mitzvah, but you're doing it through an aveira of doing it. Okay? And the general consensus amongst you read the Yachronim, they're fighting a rearguard action against this, and they're basing they're limiting it and questioning can you push off the siyum, right, and making it specifically for it, basically no, right, and they're losing, right? You see them losing the whole time, right? I haven't seen it advertised here in Israel. But I haven't. That doesn't mean that it hasn't been. But I've seen it advertised in the States. That different restaurants tell you when they're having the siyum, right? What time, right? Right. So you can order make sure to order your ribs by this point, right? And be there. Yeah. Okay, it's there. So does that have any we laugh and we should laugh, and it's mitzvah haba ba'aveira. But it's important to understand, perhaps to give a little bit of a dan l'chaf zchut, and then maybe to explain it on a deeper level. If you take a look at number 24, right, if we have more time to go through everything else, but so I haven't found, to the best of my knowledge, it's not in print, but it's a well-known psak. You can understand the psak. I remember going to camp, back in the day, more than 50 years ago, and there was a siyum regularly. From camp, at every night there would be a siyum, a dinner, and then they would have the regular meal. So how does that work? So it's based on a psak of Rav Moshe Feinstein, or a concept, and it's an interesting idea. He says the following. So this is taken from Rav Gavriel Tziner, he's a Papa Chassid, but he a very prolific author and in various in halachic areas. So in his volume, one of his volumes actually, on Ben HaMitzarim, so he says, Shosim siyum b'yeshivot amachanot hanofesh, camps of the country, mutarim kol ha'ochlim biyachad lechol basar v'lishtot yayin, ve'af hanashim mutarot. And even the women is, because there's a question, what are women who normally won't attend the siyum? So can they specifically attend the siyum for this? So the answer is yes, fine, okay. So the footnote here, mipi gdolei hora'ah, kevan sha'aderech bimot ha'kayis shosim simcha, korim lechol b'nei yeshiva v'ha'camp v'ha'country. I don't know where it's v'ha'country, right? That's a country camp. V'kach kama b'kitzur chod ben ha'mitzarim b'shem hagon Maram Feinstein. Well, there's basically saying you can have whether it's, let's say, a camp or it's a bungalow colony, whatever it is, you create a new community. You create a new family. So basically, everyone in the communal dining room is part of the family, and that's not a problem, right? The whole issue of going specifically for the siyum, right, going to the restaurant at this time because there's the siyum, so that's a different issue. Right, but so here you can create an artificial community, and all of us who've been to camps know that those artificial communities become very powerful over the course of lifetimes. So what?
Why wouldn't that work for any Beit Knesset to do it, saying we're a kehila?
Okay, you could theoretically say it, but the question is, but in a camp it's much easier. In the yeshiva you have a dining room, everybody eats there. Right, throughout the summer, right? We're right. So it could be a yeshiva, it could be a camp, right?
But not a bungalow colony.
But not a bungalow colony. A bungalow colony, perhaps a little bit less.
It's really different between you're going to have a seal because you just happen to finish what you're learning at that point. Or you're purposely going to make it.
Right. So the poskim that I get into that exact point. And the general, there's sort of a sidebar discussion about it. The assumption is that you shouldn't schedule your siyum, and that it should be a siyum that happens to fall out, right? But then there's the question: is it if you speed up your siyum, right? So that's a good thing. You're learning more Torah, right? And if you finished your masechet 2 weeks ago and you wait to do the daf now that's more problematic. So there's and then there's a question, well, what about the person who finishes Masechta all the time but doesn't make a siyum? Or if you make a siyum, right, there's a story, I don't know if it's true, but it's a good story, that it's one of those apocryphal stories about how Rav Moshe had his driver stop one day at the bakery. And he goes into the bakery and he buys some babka, comes out, and he says, so the driver, I've never seen the Rosh Yeshiva ever do that before. So he says that he said, well, today's special, I'm making a siyum, so I bought a babka. So he said, but Rav makes siyum all the time. He says, yeah, but I've finished Shas the 100th time, so it's worth a babka. Okay, so that's okay. They say the story about Rav Moshe. I don't know. They don't tell stories about that about you and me, but that's like okay. So whether it's true or not about Rav Moshe, fine. But the point is, if you don't make it a siyum, or if you have some babka, right? If some rugelach that are out, right, and a little coffee. Now you're making this. You have this gala feast because it's the 9 days. So then there's something wrong. Where can you put in a little dan l'chav zchut, which you can't do for me because I'm already 5 minutes over time? Is that there's a notion that just to get back to that original source. There is a Masorah, and this can also explain the 3-week idea in terms of why they expanded all the way back to the 3 weeks, that custom. There is a Masorah today for Shivasar B'Tammuz. It's lent in the Gemara that on Shivasar B'Tammuz was the ending of the bringing of the Korban Tamid. Right? It wasn't only that the walls were breached, but this is the Korban Tamid. And that is that basically there is a mourning here for the Beit HaMikdash ceased to become operational. It was no longer operational from Shivasar B'Tammuz. It was still standing. It hadn't been burnt down. But it was not functioning as a Beit HaMikdash anymore. The Avodah, the service in the Beit HaMikdash is something that is gone. And to be dan l'chav zchut, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily where things really are, but nevertheless, when you have this lack of, and there was that custom, the Gemara in Bava Batra talks about how when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, there were people who ceased to eat meat. They ceased to drink wine, period. They said, we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, we can no longer eat meat. And Rabbi Yoshua, putting the pieces together for that generation, said, well, do you eat bread? And they said, yes. And they said, well, there were flour offerings that were brought in the Mikdash, so you can't have. Do you drink, do you drink water? They poured water on the Mizbeach on Sukkot. So you can't drink water. So you have to live a normal life. Right? You can't just stop living your lives. We have to go into the post-Churban world. And we're still in that post-Churban world. The 3 weeks basically says, or this period of time, we are putting ourselves in that mindset of people who are saying our lives are shattered. We can't go on. And that's the idea. How did Jews compensate? How did Jewish culture compensate? With Limud Torah. That's without that. That's what Yavna, Tenli Yavna v'Chachameha. Give me Yavna, give the Chachamim, give us the Sanhedrin. This is how we're going to survive what they expected would be decades and turns out to be millennia of Churban.
Why don't they allow
right?
engagements and weddings?
Okay, so I don't know if it always works. So, but the point though is that the siyum becomes a symbol of, right? I don't think that now having said giving dan l'chav zchut, I don't think that the restaurant owners who get the siyumim, they have 3 siyumim a night, so that way that all of their customers can be covered, are thinking in that term. I don't think that. I'm not so naive. However, halavai that we should be zocha to really be to have siyumim that are meaningful and that really are sudot mitzvah, not as excuses, but as true reasons to be celebrating, and that hopefully will lead us to a time where of Geula Shlema. Amen.
Amen. Sir.